Well, good morning, everyone, and welcome to the spring technical seminar. I get ahead of myself already in 2021. We're very pleased to welcome over 200 of you once again to our seminars. Unfortunately, for the third time in a row, this is a webinar rather than a seminar. Very much hoping, it feels very close now, fingers crossed, that we will be able to do our autumn technical seminar as a physical event. So please do look forward to that one. For transparency's sake, I should say I'm reporting here from Bedford. We are the second highest COVID cases in the country, so I'm just putting it out there. For Bedford, we're quite proud. It's the first time we've been high up in the charts in any national policy ever, so we're quite proud of that one. So yeah, agenda for today, we're starting at just past 10 o'clock. We'll be finished by 11:30, so we'll have you away by 11:30. So we have Howard, who's going to do a quick introduction in a second or so. We're going to pass over to Bim Afalami, who's the MP for Hitchin and Harpenden. He's done a lot of work with small companies and startups and has some great ideas going forward with COVID and what's going to happen there. We'll then pass over to Gillian Roche-Saunders, who's head of our regulatory committee, who gives an update on that particular committee's work. Then we'll push on to Alex Buckley, obviously from HMRC. He's going to tell us about the advanced assurance process and how that's working, operating at the moment. Then over to Sue Crawford from our own tax and technical committee to tell us about the work that committee's been doing over the last few months. Then finally, we haven't done a panel session for a while, so we thought we'd do one. So this panel is entitled, What Should the Post-Pandemic Economic Environment for Early Stage Businesses Look Like? So we have four panelists. So we have John Spindler, who's the CEO from Capital Enterprise. We have Rolf Merchant, who's head of Members for Policy at Innovate Finance. We have Jenny Tooth, who obviously from UKBAA. And we have Ken Cooper as Managing Director, Venture Solutions at the British Business Bank. When they come on, I'll ask them to do their own introductions. But that's way enough for me for the moment. So I'll pass over to Howard to give us a very quick introduction and then introduce Ben.
Good morning, everybody. I'm not quite sure what Mark's left for me to say, but can I welcome all our speakers, and particularly Bim, as I mentioned earlier. I think I've known Bim since his school days, and I'm absolutely delighted that he's now a successful Conservative Member of Parliament. Can I make a particular point to Alex Buckley, that I think we still have the 2025 sunset date for EIS, which will soon have some impact on the amount of money that can be raised. And I would very much hope the government will either remove that sunset clause or extend it quite significantly. I think everyone well knows Sue Crawford, who is doing tax and technical, and Jenny Tooth leading on what early stage of businesses should look like. I just end by saying I think that EIS has, as well as having been incredibly useful prior to the pandemic in financing new small businesses, the number of EIS finance businesses that have survived is most impressive. And in that sense, again, EIS has been a real help to this country during the pandemic period. Anyway, I shall now shut up and hand over to Bim. Where is he? There he is. Welcome. Welcome, Bim. Over to you.
Well, thank you, Howard, and it's an absolute pleasure to be here, a pleasure to join you, and it's a shame we can't do it.
Okay, let me kind of move.
We can't do it in person, but soon we will be, due to the roadmap and all the wonderful things that we'll be able to get back to. I, last year, spent a bit of time, I gathered together some business leaders, investors, financiers, people like the CEO of ASOS, Helena Morrissey, people like this. And I gathered together and we posed the question, how are we going to recover economically from COVID? Now, we all know, of course, that the economics is not the only impact of COVID, but that was obviously our focus. Now, I won't take you, and I produced a report called Unlock Britain. Now, I won't take you through all the recommendations because if you're interested, you will be able to read them. But what I want to focus on for this audience, and I speak as somebody who, before I went into politics, I worked as a corporate lawyer, then in finance at HSBC. So I have, the city is where I've sort of come from. I know how important it is. I know how important investment is. I know how important the work that all of you do, whether it be on the advising side or the investing side. and it's something that I want to take into my politics. But so rather than talk about, let's say, all the other aspects of the economics, I wanted to focus on things that I think you and I and many others who understand what private sector investment can do and the powerful good it is, we need to be shouting a lot more from, and the sort of things that I think we can do in order to help the country not just recover from COVID, because recovery is important, but we need to do more than recover. We need to actually build a better economy after COVID. And I think that that is something we should all aim for. One idea that came out of my Unlock Britain report was about getting more equity into our SME sector. We all know that there's been a long-running thing, particularly since the financial crisis, with SMEs saying, oh, they don't have enough access to debt finance. And for some SMEs, that is a problem. But I put it to you that the biggest problem is not a lack of debt finance. Frankly, I think there's actually too much debt finance for a lot of companies for them to absorb. And indeed, as you know, if you're trying to grow your business, once you hit a certain debt level, it becomes difficult to do. But we need more equity, because there are sectors that are attracting a lot of equity, and in fact, you will be investing in them. And we know what they are. They are, anything that it has a high technological aspect to it attracts a lot of equity. Anything that looks fast-growing, dynamic, that can be scaled easily, can get a lot of equity. But there are lots of other companies that may be less sexy, may have a less stratospheric potential for growth, but they need equity too. And so for the British economy, we need to increase the amount of equity that goes into those companies. There are lots of ways of us doing that. No. Not just the EIS scheme, not just the existing tax incentives and structures that we have. We need to make a stronger commitment to them. I don't like the way that when it comes to every budget, everybody's slightly nervously wondering whether these things will continue. I think that we really need to be absolutely clear that they're continuing, and we're going to strengthen them and make them even more attractive. But in addition, I believe that we should be looking at setting up a fund that the government can help seed and sponsor, not necessarily like the Future Fund, which it's done for tech, but something along those lines, to get more equity overall into our SME sector across the country, in all parts of the country, in all sorts of sectors, because there isn't a problem when it comes to, as I say, certain sexy, the most interesting, most dynamic sectors, but there is a problem getting equity into lots of other sectors. So, for example, how easy will it be to attract equity into a pub group now, for example, or an entertainment business? We need to see how we can increase the private sector money, not government money necessarily, but the government can help sponsor it or do match funding. So I think that creating a fund that can be allocated and invested by private sector managers with their investors in mind, I think could be a way of increasing the equity. And this takes me on to the second point I wanted to make, which is about pension funds. We have a very successful pension fund sector. We have highly able managers, world-renowned. I think it's close to £1 trillion that is in the UK pension fund assets, that own UK pension fund assets. But yet, when it comes to technology, as I was just talking, when it comes to the tech sector, of which we are the leaders in Europe, only about 3%, 3.7% of investments into that sector come from UK pension funds, compared to 36.5% that comes from institutional pension funds elsewhere in other parts of the world. What this means is that when the new tech IPO makes everybody, all those investors, very rich and successful, and so they should do because they took a bet and they invested equity in the right business that did well, the UK pension funds don't see that return. That equity, that value, goes to America or Canada or China or wherever it is. And I don't think that's a good trade for Britain. I want British investors investing in British pension funds to have access to that. But in order to do that, we need to change the rules for UK pension funds and their investments. And this isn't just because, I'm a sort of, I believe in all things should be deregulated all the time. That's not the case. But what I do believe is, if a pension fund investment is good enough for Americans or French or Canadian pensions. Why isn't it good enough for British? And we really need to look at changing those rules, tweaking them, because small amounts, just increasing the percentage a little bit of that £1 trillion could have a significant impact. And what that will mean is not only we have long-term institutional investment into some of our fastest growing industries, but it will mean that British people, British taxpayers, British pension fund holders will get those returns. And that can only be a good thing for the British economy. So they're just two ideas that I wanted to put to you. But I just want to say, you don't probably hear this enough from politicians. The private sector is the driving force of this country. The government can only do what the private sector allows us to do for the wealth that you create. So keep doing it. Thank you.
Thank you, Bim. Would anyone like to make a quick question to Bim, or wait until we get to the end of the programme?
I think Bim's got to leave, but there's a couple of questions that came through, Howard.
Right.
I think one of them was certainly about the report that you've done, Bim. We'll send that on to members and they can have a look and have a full read of what you put forward. One of the questions kind of was around the future fund, and obviously that helped some later stage businesses, but not perhaps some early stage businesses. What was your thoughts on the future fund and how effective that was?
You made the point quite well. It was very effective as far as it went. So for what it was trying to achieve, it was very effective, but it was not a complete solution to what the problem was, which is there were some early stage companies who just couldn't get financed. Simple as that. Now, from a government perspective, by goodness, I mean, the Chancellor, as far as Chancellors go, this Chancellor really understands finance. And I completely understand why he did not want to put government taxpayer money at risk in very early stage businesses. That's why I think that we should have a bigger fund, equity fund, that can help invest more broadly across the whole sector. Because if you do that, then it wouldn't necessarily lead taxpayer funds into the way that the future fund was not really designed to do.
Sure. And certainly I know on the pension fund side, we've been calling that for a long time, to pension funds to put more money into early stage businesses, have the biggest slice of their portfolio go into those early stage businesses, because they too often concentrate, and they're very conservative pension funds, particularly UK pension funds. They tend to focus on the blue chip companies and make it very easy in that sense. So yeah, it's great to hear you calling for that as well.
Just one thing on this that I think isn't really appreciated enough. If we look at the number of companies and the nature of the FTSE 100 or FTSE 250 today, it doesn't capture a significant portion of the fastest growing, most dynamic, interesting companies.
It's true.
30 years ago, it did.
Yeah.
Today, it does not.
Yeah.
So if you're a pension fund, they're deeply conservative. Now, look, I'm usually in favor of conservatism, but in this instance, they just have to recognize that if they do not say to the government, alongside people like us, say to the government, look, if you just change the rules a little bit, we can allocate 2% more, 5% more. If they don't do that, what will happen is the value of those pensions over time will not go up significantly, because the value will all be in the other parts of the sector. And why should France, Germany, Canada, the US, etc., why should they take all the value from British companies?
Yeah, absolutely. And it doesn't help UK companies here. It doesn't help our investors here, aren't seeing that growth in their pension pots. So it's just a lose-lose on all fronts on that sense, isn't it? So yeah, very much with you on that one. Thank you very much. Just checking to see if there's any other questions come through. Just one come through. Does there need to be any changes in? So there's obviously lifetime allowances and caps for EIS and how much you can put into EIS. Do you think there should be changes there that would help private investors that you said we need to mobilise more to try and get more money into the small companies?
Well, the truth is we can always change it and make it more generous. We can always do that. For me, I think that I don't see that as being likely, largely because I think that the Chancellor and his team are always having to fight rearguard action against Treasury officials who seem to want to get rid of tax incentives altogether. But the reform I would include, and I could have mentioned this maybe at the beginning, but I omit it, was ISAs. ISAs can only be invested in a particular way. If we allowed a certain percentage of ISAs to go into private companies with proper safeguards, so it could only be a certain percentage, and you could probably only allow people who had a certain amount of money there in the first place. If we allow that, that would also provide a way for more equity to get into faster growing companies and give access to ordinary people who invest in ISAs. Ordinary people don't invest in hedge funds or private equity funds, but they do invest ISAs. And if we give ordinary people that chance to get access to that private sector, dynamic private sector, that could only be a good thing.
Yeah.
Absolutely, absolutely. So that's some great thoughts and ideas there, Ben. Thank you very much for sharing them with them this morning. As I say,
thank you.
Send over the report to all our members and they can have a look and
arrange drinks and dinners and all the things with the money you've saved over the last year. Don't just hoard it. Arrange dinner so we can all see each other.
Wouldn't that be nice? That sounds like a good
Ben, make sure you persuade the government to phase out this sunset clause. Otherwise, it is going to damage EIS investment.
No, I heard that point. Now I'll correspond with you separately on that. So we'll put the note together to the Chancellor on that.
Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Ben. Take care.
Thank you.
Okay, so moving on with our agenda, our next speaker is Gillian Rose-Saunders. Gillian, obviously a regular speaker on our technical seminars, and she's going to run us through how the Regulatory Committee has been running over the last few weeks and what they're focusing on at the moment. Gillian, over to you. You're on mute, Gillian. First time today.
Somebody had to get the game started, didn't they?
Good morning, everyone.
Well, yes, as always, here to talk about what's been going on in the regulatory world and with the Regulatory Committee over the past few months since I spoke to you last. I'm Gillian Roach-Saunders, a partner at Dempsey Associates, and I chair the Regulatory Committee here at EISA. And today there is a lot to get through. So I'm going to be cantering through a couple of topics that I just want to get on your radar, but where there are other resources for you to use. And then we're going to spend a bit of time looking at the FCA's very recent proposals on how, on the marketing of high risk investments, which is a category that EIS falls into. And then we'll just do a few extra things for your radar at the end of the session. So I am going to jump straight in and talk about the first topic for your radar, which is product governance. Now, you'll have heard me talk about product governance in the past. It's something that came in with MiFID II a few years ago. It is one of those topics that keeps rearing its head. And I think it's fair to say when across the Regulatory Committee, we think it's probably one of those areas where the industry could be a little bit hotter on this. Especially because it's an area that the FCA is consistently hot on at the moment. We're seeing it come out in almost every supervisory exercise from the FCA, whether that's letters they're writing to firms asking for information, or whether it's actually visits and other interactions. So product governance is the number one thing I would say to get onto very quickly. And one of the things I've noticed at the moment is that there are many firms who seem not to be quite sure or to have miscalculated whether or not they're caught by these product governance rules, referred to as PROD. And many think it doesn't apply because they don't consider themselves to be a manufacturer or a distributor. But often that's because they haven't spent the time looking at those definitions. So if you are in that camp where you think these rules don't apply to you, do take a look. And if you're an advisor, a fund manager, promoter, intermediary, corporate finance house, there will be aspects of these rules that apply to you, if not both the manufacturer and distributor rules. So do take a look at those. And the Regulatory Committee, and not me on this occasion, one of my valued colleagues has produced a product governance member briefing, which came out last week to help you on the road with this one. The FCA also recently published a review of asset management sector. They'd visited 8 firms kind of ranging in AUM size and focus, but they'd looked at one of their retail products, taken it through the full life cycle, how it was designed in the first place, iterations, how it's distributed, and has come up with feedback, lots of feedback. Clearly, no one in the industry is doing this as well as the FCA would like. And this paper from the Regulatory Committee, which should have landed in your box last Wednesday, contains some of that information for you to kind of help you on your way with looking at PROD and dusting that one off. Really worthwhile. But as you've got something in your inbox, I will leave that there. If you don't have it and you would like it, you can see the email address in the top right-hand corner. Do just drop us a line and we will get a copy of that out to you. But apart from that, I'm going to leave that there. Next up, very hot off the press, we have an update on EIS funds and how FSCS compensation applies to them. So hot off the press that this ended up in my inbox last night. And so the regulatory committee hasn't yet had a chance to look at it. But what we found, and we've been kind of talking to FSCS and FCA about this for the last kind of 9 months to try and get an answer, is that there are some EIS funds out there who believe that FSCS compensation applies. They're paying their fees to the FSCS each year, and they're telling investors that FSCS compensation applies. And there are another raft of EIS fund managers who've been told something different and don't think FSCS compensation applies. So normally there's it's not the end of the world if the industry perhaps has different opinions on this, but I think particularly in the wake of LCF, we need to be really, really clear on whether FSCS compensation applies or not. So we've been in discussions, and last night had confirmation from the FCA that they do think that FSCS compensation is applicable to firms who are managing EIS funds. That is not to say that in all cases it will apply, and you may have very specific features about your fund, which means that FSCS compensation doesn't apply. But what we have learned is that just by being an EIS fund or an AIF, that is not a reason for FSCS not to apply. So if that's what you have been thinking to date, that might be something to go back and look at. But as I say, that is very fresh off the press. I'm going to confirm a few of the details around the edges with the FCA, and we'll talk about it as a regulatory committee and then get something out to you in the next few weeks so that you can look at that properly. Great. So next up, we have high risk investments. And if you've seen any of the press over the last few weeks, you may have spotted that the FCA has released proposals to make the marketing of high risk investments more difficult, essentially, to a retail audience. And having looked at how they're defining high-risk investments, it seems quite clear that EIS is going to be caught up in this in one way or another. Today, I'm going to tell you about the top 3 things I think you need to know about, the extra steps you'll have to take when selling EIS, a potential extra risk of reclassification for EIS, which would be challenging, and also if you approve documents, financial promotions for other companies, whether that's appointed representatives or single EIS companies raising finance, what the rules might look like for you. And of course, we're going to be talking to the FCA about this. This is a discussion paper. They want to move very quickly, but it's a discussion paper, so we get a chance to input. And if you have any views, we would really welcome them. It's great to hear what members say when we're producing one of these responses. So please do get in touch if you've got any thoughts, and I will just take you through those 3 points. So for right now, we're going to come back to this picture shortly, but for right now, I would like you to look at the left-hand side of this high-risk investments bucket. And this is why EIS and SEIS is caught up in the definition of high-risk investments. That's because the FCA is applying this term to 3 areas where it already has extra rules. And on the left-hand side, you'll see the term non-readily realizable securities, and that covers investments that are illiquid and hard to value. And as you know, EIS and SEIS has been caught up in that definition for quite some time. So simply, without kind of any changes to the to how EIS is categorized, we automatically get brought into this definition of high risk investments. And I'll come on to talk about the right-hand side shortly and how that might impact us. But in its simplest terms, just because we are caught in this definition, there are going to be 3 extra steps that need to be taken by FCA-regulated firms whenever they are selling investments. So here we go. The extra steps. I think the most onerous of these is the first one, and that is the verification of self-certification. What does that mean? If somebody says they're high net worth or sophisticated, you need to prove that they are before you can sell the investment to them. You can no longer, in the proposals, rely on the fact that they've signed that piece of paper and know what they're talking about. So there's going to be some extra steps that need to be taken. in order to do that. I think the challenge comes when you try to work out how could you actually do that in practice, how you actually, as I say, not as a financial advisor, but if you're a product provider, how are you going to know and what are you going to need to ask to in order to ensure, or to gather evidence, I suppose, of the fact that somebody does have a certain level of sophistication or does have a certain net worth, income level. And so I would be really interested to know whether anyone has any concerns around that particular step, because from our initial conversation at Regulatory Committee, we thought that might be one of the most challenging aspects in practical terms. Improving risk warnings, that feels far less controversial, so I won't spend too much time on it, but there might be some improved risk warnings coming down the line. And then the third step is perhaps the most interesting. The FCA would like to add friction into the sales process, which is essentially going to cause the investor to pause and think, do they really want to invest in a high risk investment before they actually cross that line, sign on the dotted line? And I think it's the ideas here that are interesting. It's, for example, one of the suggestions is an SMS message that they might get to their phone and then have to reconfirm by clicking on something in that message that they are indeed happy to move forwards and invest. Other examples are online tests and just-in-time educational videos. I think the FCA would be really interested for any other ideas, and also if any of them seem totally balmy or pointless, I think perhaps that feedback might also need to be presented as well. So do have a think, but essentially they will be looking for some kind of positive friction. So if you do think those kinds of ideas don't make sense, but you've got another idea, please do put that forwards to us and we'll see if we can feed that through. So these are the extra steps, and almost no matter what happens, it seems highly likely that a version of this is going to apply. But there is something that I want to bring to your attention. I promised that we would go back to that picture of the high risk investments bucket. Something that just, you need to spot a few different places in the discussion paper to draw this out, but we're a little bit concerned that EIS or SEIS might get recategorized and moved to the right-hand side of the screen as a speculative illiquid security. And the significance of this is that if you're a speculative illiquid security, you can't really market that to people you don't know. It's incredibly difficult. So you can't have it on a website, you can't put it on social media, you need to know the people in front of you before you market. It also can only be sold to high net worth or sophisticated investors, so no restricted investors, and there's no special advised sales route, which means that you don't need those certificates. So essentially, there's lots to be said for staying on the left-hand side of the screen where we just use appropriateness tests and we check people's certificates before they invest rather than at the very start of that process. So that's kind of what's at risk with this. And here's why. There are two reasons. First of all, you'll see speculative illiquid securities currently includes bonds and preference shares. This was essentially the mini bond band as it started out, and it has grown over time. The FCA is keen for ordinary shares to also be caught up in this definition. So it would be bonds, preference shares, and ordinary shares if they are used for speculative purposes. And speculative includes kind of buying and developing property, for example, or other assets. It also involves on lending. So if you have any inheritance tax products, you might already be thinking, well, that might be enough for me to be kind of paying attention to this. There's an extra reason why EIS and SEIS might get caught up in this. So first up, equity might be included in speculative illiquid securities, meaning that they can't really be visible to ordinary retail investors. The second reason is that the only example the FCA has used of extra features it would like to bring into the definition of speculative is early stage business. As you'll see from the quote on the screen, they are looking to include businesses that have no track record and are in the early days of establishing themselves. And obviously, details of this would become clearer further down the line, but that does look very much like a venture capital investment. Now, they're not immune to the fact that this could affect the venture capital sector. They go on to say that they realize how important early stage capital is to the economy. However, they are saying that they want to include extra features in the speculative illiquid securities definition, and this is the only one on the table. And so with that in mind, I would be a little bit worried about the fact that because equity is being brought in and because the early stage nature of a project or business could be included as a speculative feature, that EIS and SEIS could get caught in those more restrictive rules on top of the new rules that will apply to all high risk investments. So I think it's a really important paper that we respond to and that we make very clear arguments to the FCA on this, and the more voices and the more ideas, the better. So please do let us know, and we will keep you posted as we're drafting that letter so that you can see it. And if there's anything in that you agree, that you could also submit along the same lines. Now, the next bit that I want to mention is only relevant to firms who sign off the financial promotions for other companies. So if that's not you, take 2 minutes out. We'd seen last year that the Treasury had put out a consultation on this, and then it went quiet. The FCA has now included it in this high risk investments paper, even though it's actually going to apply across the market and won't be specific to high risk investments. So clearly the idea is not going away. A gateway was mentioned before, and there isn't really much more detail on what that gateway means. Essentially, it's just going to be a way for the FCA to control who can approve financial promotions for third parties so that they can closely supervise those approvals, and also so that they can control exactly what you can approve. So maybe it's equity, not debt, or maybe it's professional, not retail, etc. So they're still very much keen on a gateway, but there's no big news there. The other two bits are a little bit more interesting. So monitoring, it's really how long the monitoring needs to go on for and how that changes the dynamic that I think is interesting. So they want you to monitor the financial promotion. And, if the product changed, the rules changed, the market changed, you probably would have done that anyway and said, hang on, guys, we need a new financial promotion. What's interesting here is that they're including other things like use of funds. Are the funds being used for the purposes that were set out in the documentation? Is the proposal still commercially viable? And also, is there anything about the due diligence that you did on the company in the first place that has changed? And all of those things would feed into whether or not you need to update the financial promotion. But the level of closeness of that relationship and the ongoing nature of that, I think, really shifts kind of how feasible it's going to be for companies to do this going forwards. And that might affect fundraisers and the flow of capital, therefore. So monitoring, and then I suppose onboarding. This is really about, distribution, onboarding. The FCA's got expectations that you would make sure that the user journey is totally compliant and that the right frictions are in place, even when you're not controlling that, so that you might essentially control the distribution that's being done by this third-party company raising finance. So if you are a principal firm that helps appointed representatives with this, or if you're involved with raising money for individual companies, then I think this is definitely worth having a look at. And if you take a look at it and you think, actually, this just wouldn't be worth our time anymore, maybe that's something that we need to feed back to the FCA. So that's it for high risk investments. Lots in there. It's only 41 pages, so it's actually quite manageable to get through. And possibly worth taking a look at. And we'd be, as I said, really interested to hear anything you've got to say about those proposals. Just a few other things to put on your radar before I finish. Please, if you haven't already started preparing for the investment firm prudential regime, it is worth doing it. Some firms are having a real shock, realizing quite how significant an impact that might have on their capital. And obviously, the sooner you have that shock, the sooner you can prepare for it. It doesn't apply to everybody. The shock doesn't apply to everyone. For some, it's more of a gradual increase, but it really is worth getting your team onto it if they haven't done that already. I'll go to the bottom first, next actually, was something that's been delayed. I've mentioned before a big survey that the FCA was going to do that would have focused in on our sector in particular. While overall the alternatives review is still a priority.
About imposter syndrome and how that affects female entrepreneurs, and she's actually speaking.
Thanks, Jenny. So while it's still really important, one of the things that is not going to happen is the survey won't be happening in the next few months at least. It's still being kind of on the back burner, but it's while the FCA is doing more direct supervision. So there is more chance you'll hear from them directly with a Section 165 request or something else along those lines. So still lots of focus on retail investments in our sector, but it just won't be in the form of that survey. And then thinking forwards to that, hot topics to turn to, I've already mentioned product governance, but the other things, vulnerable clients, it's really worth having a look at that, thinking about, does your policy do what the FCA intends for it to do? Have you thought about who might be vulnerable in your investor base, your client base? And then also good corporate culture is a real theme through all of the supervisory work. So thinking about, is that still working? Is it working now that you might be kind of thinking about returning to the office, at least in part? And also, is it creating a good compliance culture? So that's it. I feel like I've spoken at top speed today. The email address, again, is in the top right-hand corner. So if you've got any questions, feedback on that paper, please do let us know. We'd really value hearing from you, and we'll keep you posted on where we get to with that response.
Thanks, Sheila. Be careful what you ask for, because there is a question. So there's a question from Nick Morgan. So the question is the requirement for verification of self-certification at investment manager level only relevant where one is accepting business directly from investors as opposed to via financial advisors?
We would love to know the answer to that. That does feel really important, and we thought that that would be something we would emphasize, that there are different models and that maybe it should be possible to rely on the financial advisor. One of the things I would say is that if we get caught up in that speculative illiquid securities route, it is harder to rely on the financial advisor. It might be, under the way the rules are written at the moment, it might still be possible to place reliance, but I think that will come with the detail of the draft rules. So we'll be certainly putting something forward on that in our response to this discussion paper before those rules are drafted.
Brilliant. Okay, well, thanks very much, Gillian. You've got your details on the screen there, so if anyone wants to get in touch with Gillian and ask any more questions, please do. Otherwise, please do look at the regulatory newsletter that came out last week. There's lots of information in there. Okay,
thanks very much.
Bye
Gillian.
for now. Bye. So our next presenter is Alex Buckley from HMRC. So many of you will know Alex. He heads up the venture capital relief team at HMRC. So Alex, if you want to put your video on and your audio on, then we'll go ahead. Thanks, Alex.
Thanks, Mark. Good morning, everybody. Yes, as Mark says, I'm HMRC's lead for the venture capital schemes. We work very closely, obviously, therefore, with the venture capital reliefs team. I suppose the people who perhaps you deal with on a more day-to-day basis, and of course, closely with our colleagues in Treasury. So I will, yes, pass on Howard's comments about the sunset clauses, of course. This is just a very general point on that. I think there's a value in sunset clauses. I suppose it gives us an opportunity to focus, perhaps, and think at that point of, is the relief doing what it's supposed to, and is it achieving what it is? But that's a general comment and not a particular comment on the IS, as it were. Mark's asked me to give you, I suppose, a bit of an update on things. I think the first thing, perhaps, is the obvious point, is that whilst there's been incredible amount of turbulence impact of COVID and, of course, the end of the transition period, I think in terms of the significant legislation or process changes, this has been the quietest time for a number of years for the IS in that sense. And I think that's really because there's been a focus on stability of service, that is making sure that the schemes are there, ready and available to support growth, whilst I suppose other levers are being pulled to provide that emergency support or that targeted short-term intervention. Obviously, like all of you, we've had quite an impact on our service delivery and how we've had to work. I suppose I mention this because for the operational teams, they've all had to be working from home, and that's been going on since March. Many of us not seen the offices since then. And obviously making sure they've got access to data and the volume of documents that come in to be able to enable them to deliver the decision and provide the services has proved a little bit difficult. Particularly some of there's a few problems with where we've had new starters, and we've lacked that sense of an office environment to make sure we get the messages across. So we've had to work, I think, extra hard on giving them the support to make sure we're providing you with the service you need. I think the key for us in the last year has been priority on getting those applications turned around as quickly as possible. It's been a real effort that's gone into that, and that's been in trying to make sure we've been as pragmatic as possible in handling those applications, because we want to make sure there's no delay in getting that flow of money out. What I would say though, in terms of what the past year, in terms of flow of applications and things like that, yes, it's been an interesting, certainly interesting year in terms of fluctuations. Certainly been some encouraging signs. I can't say any more, I'm afraid, because I'm sort of under strict instructions not to, because we have the national statistics coming out next week, published on the 27th. They will cover the EIS, SEIS and SITR, and they will give us some data on the advanced assurances for the 2021 tax year, and also for compliance statements received for 1920. So that coming out a week this time next week. I think the other thing that was, I think, important to us is to try and understand, and perhaps one of the things we were particularly concerned about was the potential impact of COVID on companies' operations. That is, would they be able to go on and continue to meet those obligations they're intended to, or has the COVID, the lockdown, that impacted the company's ability, for example, to spend money, that sort of thing. On a positive sense, I think we've had very few reports of companies being in trouble, which is a good thing, obviously, but also because the unfortunate legislation does provide very limited means for discretion, if any, really. However, if we get an earlier sighting of companies and having particular issues, then obviously the earlier we know that, the more chance we have of being able to do something about it. And of course, if there's actually, there are wider problems out there, it would help us get a better sense of the sort of scale of impact. That's indeed what's happening. I mentioned, I suppose, that yes, it's been a very quiet time for legislation. That said, we had the approved knowledge intensive funds launched last year. I mean, a discrete measure to try and sort of a little bit of extra help on get that focus on knowledge intensive companies. And we do know there's been interest from a number of managers, and some funds been successfully closed recently. The other, I suppose, point would be that we had to amend the EIS rules to smooth the interaction with the future fund. That was where possible, to hopefully try and make it a little bit easier for those investors who are taking part in both of those. The other, I suppose, big issue, I suppose not the elephant in the room as such, but is the end of the transition period. Obviously, there's going to be, I think, very interesting to see how this develops in terms of subsidy control. The government's going to be introducing its, I suppose, its domestic law, I suppose, a full subsidy control system, work for the entirety of the UK. But obviously, that will have to respect the subsidy provisions of TCA, other international obligations, and of course the Northern Ireland Protocol. I think there's obviously a lot there. There's a lot of uncertainty. There's a lot still to be worked out, and obviously that will have implications for future decisions around subsidy and the old state aid conditions we had. I think the main point there is, in the meantime, we sort of carry on as you were. All those limits and accumulation rules are still within the domestic legislation. Statutory instruments last year did freeze some of those EU references in the EU documents, as it were, but they still apply in terms of working out how these conditions are delivered. So yes, carry on as you were. And of course, then we have some legacy commitments, and we'll have future ones in terms of transparency reporting and making sure we have clear audit trails on why decisions were made and why effectively aid or subsidy was given, which is why it's always important to make sure we have that information from you. I know Mark and the technical committee have asked some clarifications on some points of some of these interactions with the EU or the subsidy rules, particularly with the emergency funding that's happened in the last year. So I think an update is going to be circulated, if not already. If you guys have got any particular questions, particular concerns of how it applies on a day-to-day basis, flag them for us. We'll have a look. We tend to get some material into the VCM. So the other thing to note then is we've had the anniversary of the risk to capital condition. Now it's been 3 years since that's been in place. I think there's been a real positive shift in behaviours there for us, certainly. I think a lot of things that we tried to remove from the schemes have gone now, and that's real positive. There's still probably a little bit of a few problems around, I suppose, this concept of growth and what we're trying to do there, in the sense that it is a enabling companies to get set up and to give them that foundation for long-term trade. And there's a bit of a gap perhaps sometimes between that approach and project-specific financing. That's something we'll work on with people, and obviously making sure it's clear in the guidance what we're after there. I'm conscious of time now, so just looking forward then, I think that the crucial thing is we want these schemes to operate as smoothly as possible, because they need to provide the support and that for the role that business is going to play in the road to recovery. So we also want to help you to get that right. What unfortunately that will mean though is we do need to ensure standards in terms of our applications and what we're seeing coming in, particularly obviously with the advanced assurances. The pragmatic approach I mentioned previously, I'm afraid it cannot be sustained in the sense that there's quite a resource burden for us. So we are going to be enforcing the checklists. Thank you to those who are already using them, but that in all cases now we'll be asking those to be used. We do need those standard sets of information and documents. And like I say, help us help you. If there's things you think we would ask or would need to see, please put it in your applications first time. Really, we're looking for something like a sort of non-statutory clearance, that idea that you set everything out, we can understand fully what's happening. I mean, it doesn't happen often, but what we don't want is the idea that I sort of smuggle something through and hope we don't see it. Get something approved and the advanced assurance is given, and that's not what we're after. Obviously, we want that sort of full disclosure, and then you can rely on the decision you get from us. Similarly, I think we've noticed sometimes we have some quite large fundraisers being applications for those coming in which is sort of surprisingly spare on underlying detail or documents or agreements. Obviously, that's quite challenging for us then to give a decision which is binding for us in the absence of that sort of information. Just so things to think about. We want those checklists and those processes to work for both of us, as it were, both sides. So we don't want to introduce added burdens. What we're trying to do is make sure we don't get delayed. So if there is feedback on those, if there's problems, teething problems, issues, let us know. We'll try and improve that and make it work for everybody. So the other perhaps issue here then is that the purpose of the service, the advanced assurance service, is to give an opinion. Sometimes that's going to be a no. I appreciate that's not what people want to hear, but hopefully there's value in that. And obviously then we'll need to distinguish then between where you disagree with that, as it were, you don't necessarily like it, and there where possibly we have made a mistake. And obviously that may be occasionally a point of issue. I think in the majority of cases, we do get approved quickly, and I think they are turned around without that kind of problem. I think, as always, the first instance is please raise a problem you might have with the caseworker. They are part of a team. Cases are peer reviewed. That's always the first opportunity to look at that. I mean, fundamentally, if you think something has gone wrong at a point of principle, you could flag that with us. Obviously, that's something we'd take a look at. But the key point is it's the VTRT who do make these decisions. We don't overrule their work. We don't decide on cases for them. But certainly, if there's possibly something's gone wrong in the system somewhere, that is something we would look at. Because obviously, we want to make sure the companies that need the money do get the money. On that point, the VCM, we're going to be updating that, and we'll continue to update that, sort of a slow rolling progress on that. But we've had some feedback from yourselves and collaboration to get some changes in there around advanced subscription agreements, excluded activities, in particular for financial activities and insurance companies, and obviously some minor clarifications to the risk capital pages. So again, any issues, things we can change, we'd look at that. Similarly, the compliance statements. Again, we're reviewing those, trying to remove any ambiguity, make sure it's clear what we're asking for and why, and quite the real emphasis actually just to make sure people are very, very sure which form they're filling in. It still seems a bit of a problem, so we're just trying to make it absolutely certain that the EIS one is for the enterprise investment scheme, SES one is for the seed enterprise investment scheme, to avoid those sorts of mistakes. If there's something about those forms that's being frustrating for you, don't sit on it. Again, let us know. Obviously, we'll do what we can as long as the technology allows. Any of these comments, feedbacks, I'm going to ask Mark to circulate our policy inbox, like a general inbox, so you could send things into us. You may not get a personal response, as it were, but it's an opportunity to get that feedback in. Because the crucial thing is we want to work with you to make sure our services work. I think that's the most important point, because ultimately, of course, we want the schemes to fulfill their purpose, which is helping businesses, particularly in this time of recovery. Right, I've got an eye on the clock there, so I don't know if there's time for questions, but happy to take any questions.
Sure, thanks very much, Alex. And yeah, I'll obviously pass on the policy inbox and let people know how they can get hold of you on that side of it. There's always questions around the advanced assurance, as you know, on these things. So I'm just trying to pick up on the common ones here. You mentioned that some of the caseworkers obviously working remotely and people are at home, and it's difficult obviously to meet up. I think some of the kind of frustrations over the last few months have been around inconsistency, perhaps some across inspectors and how that plays out, and obviously getting consistent answers to questions that come through. Is there anything you can do? I know you've got the checklists and other bits and pieces that come in that help that, but is there anything that can be done to try and kind of smooth that out a little bit more?
I think if you genuinely think there are inconsistent decisions being made, bring them to our attention. If you want to remove names, if that's, if you want to anonymize, and we're happy to see in whatever format. But if there's then a problem of interpretation, we'd like to know why, And obviously that's something then we could pick up with teams to make sure they've got the guidance or the support they need to make the decision, because yes, they should be talking to each other and understanding these problems and making the same sort of decisions. So if there's problems, that send them into us and we'll work with the teams to make sure we can get that right. Or of course, if there's actually perhaps a problem in terms of, or if we could explain to you why those decisions we made maybe is fact dependent on that particular company, but at least, yeah, it's something we could work with you.
Sure. And again, that's the policy inbox is the best one to use for that.
Yeah. I mean, I'll just say we're also a very small team, 2.5 of us at the moment, as it were. So not that we certainly look at those and yes, do our best to pick that up. And because it is we want to make sure that there's consistency.
Sure. I won't ask who the half is, but I assume it's a part-time worker.
Yeah.
That's great. I know certainly on the Northern Line protocol that you mentioned earlier, we did do a quite a long blog on that and why that affects CIS. So yeah, I would recommend to members that they go back to their newsletter and have a look at that. Or if they haven't seen it, let me know and I can send it on to you.
If you managed to explain the Northern Line protocol in a few short sentences, well done.
It's not a few short sentences, but it is an explanation of it. But yeah, I know the stats come out 27th of May and they're always super useful. So again, we'll obviously look through those. We'll send them out to members. I guess that will look back kind of, not the COVID year, but the year before, won't it, in terms of numbers and how that's kind of playing through. So
in terms of compliance statements, yes, because it will be the 1920, but we will have the advance assurances up until this April. So that might give I guess it'll give one will give a reflection, I suppose, of demand and one perhaps of supply.
Absolutely. So we'll send that out to members as and when they come through. Alex, there's a couple of questions in the Q&A in the chat. If you wouldn't mind kind of just answering them on the Q&A in the chat rather than taking up more of your time on seminar, that'd be much appreciated.
Could I also, I will certainly pick them up. I have to leave fairly short, but I will, if there's any other questions also, if you send them on to me and I'm happy to give you some answers, we can send them circulating later. Would that be all right? Yeah,
of course, no problem. I'll let you go. All right,
thank you very much. Thanks all.
Okay, so we're going from tax to more tax because we have Sue Crawford, who is part of our tax and technical committee. She's going to run through probably some of the stuff that Alex has just mentioned there, some of the wider things that the tax and technical committee have been looking at over the last few months. Sue, I'll pass over to you. Oh, Sue, you're on mute. Are you still on mute, Sue, I think? I'll ask you to unmute. Hopefully that'll do it. Oh no, it looks like you're off mute, but can't hear you. It must be your microphone, I think. See, this is the problem with not having a physical event. Physical events, we don't have microphone issues and everything else. It's normally fine. But when we spoke earlier on, Sue, at the start of the seminar, you were coming through fine, but I think something has to happen with your microphone, I think. I'll tell you what, Sue, we'll come back to you. We'll do the panel. So the panel's about 20-25 minutes, and then we'll come back to you at the end and hopefully we'll be able to sort it out in some way, shape or form. But yeah, we'll come back to you. Okay, so bearing in mind Sue's difficulties with the microphone, we'll move on to our panel. So if Jenny and John and Rolf and Ken would like to come on, then we'll get going with the panel and hopefully come back to Sue at the end. So yeah, the panel, as I say, is entitled "What should the post-pandemic environment for early stage businesses look like?" So we're going to talk about that and how that's going to operate and the thoughts of the panelists about how they think this could be taken forward. So we'll just do some quick introductions and get the panel up and running. So Rolf, do you want to go first and just introduce yourself?
Yes, thank you, Mark. Rolf Merchant. I'm the head of member policy engagement at Innovate Finance. We are the industry body for fintech and financial innovation.
Perfect. Thank you very much. Ken, do you want to go next?
Yeah, thanks, Mark. Hi, I'm Ken Cooper. I'm Managing Director of Venture Solutions at the British Business Bank. I think some of you may remember I was here about a year ago talking about the Future Fund. I've been doing a lot of that over the last year, but also Future Fund Breakthrough, a new initiative, and I also run a lot of our venture capital programs.
Thank you very much. John, over to you.
Hi, I'm John Spindler. I'm the CEO of Capital Enterprise, which is a network of incubator accelerator universities to support early stage tech companies. I think I'm also here because I had ran and set up an SAS fund for 3 years, and I no longer do. I might touch on why I think it's really hard to run an SAS fund. And actually, listen to Gillian, I realise now it's going to be even harder in the future. I don't want to get the violins out for us that do that, but it is tough, and we're not actually that well supported. Basically, I helped with a number of organisations in the very early days of trying to initiate a wonderful thing, which was the Future Fund that Ken has gone and delivered fantastically at the British Business Bank.
Very good. I'm sure there's a few fund managers who have something to say about running an EIS fund, so we'll see how we go through. I think Jenny is just waiting for Jenny to come through, but I think she's just must be on hiatus at the moment, so we'll wait for her to come back in a second or two. But we'll crack on with that regardless. So look, guys, Bim talked about it earlier, the pandemic kind of gives us an opportunity to reset the economy. So what would be your hopes and thoughts about how that might happen and how that might play out over the next couple of years? Ken, I'll go to you first, if that's okay.
Yeah, thanks, Mark. I'm glad you said hopes, because I think it's really difficult to tell. Are we going to slip back into the ways we used to do things? Are we going to move forward? I think it's given us great opportunity. We've all found that we can work from home. We can be quite productive from home. I would say all that's a gross overgeneralization, but a lot of us have been able to do that. But I think in terms of investment, what we've seen is kind of the rise of science. Perhaps if we move away from consumerism a bit and we focus more on what we can do, and we've seen the UK's done really well in the vaccine program. We've done really well in testing, and I think if it's a hope, for me, it's a hope that we start to kind of value our scientists more and perhaps put a bit more of our investment money that way.
Yeah, sounds like a noble theme indeed. Rolf, do you want to add anything to that? Yeah, indeed. I mean, I definitely agree. There are a lot of hopes. I think we've certainly seen the benefit of digitized sort of services and the way that consumers, I'll say consumers and SMEs engaging with businesses through purely digital channels. One of our favorite stats from the lockdown was, I think it was 6 million people downloaded a mobile banking app for the first time, which just shows, the ability and the willingness of people to engage through those kind of channels. So for fintech in particular, that's really exciting. And there've been similar positives with digital lenders to both on sort of debt and equity side. Things like equity crowdfunding still popular. The role that fintech lenders have played through distributing CBILS. BBILS has been fantastic and a real feather in the cap. But I think it's just overall it's kind of underlined that there are these brilliant digital first innovative businesses out there. Many of which are new, they're scaling companies and they need that added support. They might be the growth companies of tomorrow, the unicorns, maybe even the IPO candidates of tomorrow. So what we really hope is we can see more backing for them, from the investment community and from government alike. Yeah, I'm talking of backing. It's probably a good time to bring Jenny in. Hi, Jenny. Do you want to introduce yourself first of all?
Yes, hello. I'm Jenny Tooth. I'm the CEO of UK Business Angels Association. We're the trade body for angel investing across the UK, looking after well over 15,000 angels in angel groups, but working really closely with the whole ecosystem, venture capital, EISA, obviously key players, online platforms, accelerators, and many of the intermediaries, and of course, British Business Bank and our other fellow trade bodies. Our real reaction to what's been happening in the pandemic is, first of all, angels were challenged at the beginning, but so many of them stepped up to the plate and have been not only fantastic with their own portfolio businesses in terms of really helping them through, but interestingly, so many of them did not sit on their hands after a bit and got the whole idea of using online, means to identify opportunities, invest, and we've closed so many more deals than we anticipated during that period of time. So I think that has been fundamental. The actual level of access and engagement of investors towards entrepreneurs has been huge, and we've seen a very big surge in the interest of kind of international investors as well, which I think has been, has been very useful. I mean, huge challenges clearly remain, and actually it has been very fragmented across the country as to kind of who's benefited and who hasn't. But we'll probably talk about more about this later. But the regions have obviously, many of them have suffered many more impacts, both from the entrepreneurial community's own access to finance, but also the reaction of investors towards their readiness and ability to invest. And then, of course, if we look at diverse communities, I know we'll mention that too, that we've seen definite differential in access and opportunity for founders from diverse communities. So I think many of the existing structural problems have been really highlighted during the pandemic. And so, there's a lot to be done going forward that we would identify. But that said, as I said, if you really look at the kind of end record now, a surprising level of investment has been going on, and a surprising level of willingness among the angel community to keep investing, and probably the really interesting impacts now in terms of what they want to invest in. So sustainability has become a very big theme for them. Impact, it's amazing how it's kind of changed people's investment thesis as well during this time. And obviously a very strong sense of probably, investing in tech for good, fintech for good, definitely, and investing with purpose. So I think we've seen some shifts, and I think many of those will be permanent. And I do think investing at a distance has enabled, a whole new interaction between investors, which has probably not been possible before. So I've seen some pluses, but I can see some ongoing challenges still to be addressed, and that will be sitting with us as we look, look forward to what we should be doing, which we'll probably talk about shortly.
Yeah, sure. And John, do you see a lot of what's happened during COVID? Do you see those kind of short-term blips, or are we going to go back to how we were kind of pre-COVID in terms of funding and businesses getting funding, or do you think something has changed kind of?
Well, something's fundamentally changed is the amount of government intervention, across the board. It's unprecedented. In our little world of basically the Future Fund, when we tried to lobby for it and put together for Ken took it over, we didn't expect it to be even a quarter as big as Ken turned it out to be, etc. So, but then you look at the CBIL. I mean, I was speaking to bankers recently, 47 billion is lent to small businesses. The average year is 12 billion. There's so much capital that has gone into SMEs, in a short period of time. That's going to have implications, and how that kind of feeds out, we don't know. These are very strange times. Also, I do think, actually, I mean, as an angel myself, I have 11 investments. Last year, I ended up putting 6 more checks to keep my portfolios alive, which I didn't expect. So that had a knock-on effect in doing first rounds. So I did a lot less. And I mean, virtually all angels did the same, and we stepped up. And actually, sometimes, because we backed Future Fund bids without getting our EIS, which kind of was slightly painful, but we did it, and etc. I'm sure lots of people here would have done the same as well. But going forward, I think we'll do more first round checks, first time rounds. I think that will bounce back a bit. But I'm really hopeful, and I was actually really concerned listening to Gillian, but we don't realize actually what we've done with Brexit means there's both massive challenges now and massive opportunities around regulation. And I think we need to embrace those and confront, and it really depresses me, listening to the FCA wanting to put more and more basic hurdles and obstacles on there, when they don't realize how difficult it will be in a UK market of only 65 million people to build out these big companies, and in that market without them actually having to change fundamentally their business models, their structures, their ambitions, their need to get out of the UK quickly. And therefore, on regulation, we've got to make it fast. We've got to make it easy. We've got to make it simple. And because we're a small country now, not an entry point to a big market. So the way we survive is to be good and fast and quick. And I just hope that will be accepted by governments and accepted by all the communities. We've got to basically, adapt and take those benefits that we may have, state aid, basic regulations, et cetera, and that. I must admit, I hadn't realized Gillian depressed me for 20 minutes, suggesting how difficult the FCA is going to be. And I kind of was thinking, oh my God, thank God I don't have an SIS fund anymore. because it looks like it'll be even harder. So I think that's one lesson I would have, is that we hope the government will be better and see that there are actually great opportunities, but I fear that some of its agencies basically don't.
Yeah, it's seeing the bigger picture and trying to remove a lot of the red tape and the burden that we come across so often, isn't it, as well? I just want to pick on one thing that you mentioned there was about the debt. I think you mentioned that it's almost 4 times as high as it has been in previous years. Does that worry you going forward? You know, small businesses, might need some debt for cash flow, but it needs equity for growth. So does it worry that these companies are saddled with so much debt? Yes,
it has to be. I mean, how many zombie businesses there? And the banks are trying to make these CBIL loans go into a bad debt instrument. Actually, it's not Ken's department, but I'm sure the British Business Bank probably have a lot of thoughts about, what's happened with the bounce back loans, the CBILs, et cetera, what's going to happen there. So maybe Ken would be better kind of placed to
Ken, over to you then. Yeah, the bus to you, Ken.
Yeah, I mean, it's something that we consider a lot. Obviously the government stepped up a lot, and those CBILs numbers and bounce back loan numbers are incredible numbers that we would not have thought about before. I think when it comes to debt, a couple of things that always strike me. We always used to have a stat that came out of our small business monitor, that something like 75% of businesses would rather forego growth than borrow. And I think we've probably changed that a lot with a lot of businesses now borrowing. What we have now, though, is that increased level of indebtedness. We do have very low interest rates, and particularly on the sort of CBILs and the B-bills, I mean, people should be exploring that pay-as-you-grow option. Because if you think, as individuals, we'll happily borrow 4 times our annual revenue, and not consider that actually too much of a problem. So I don't know. There will be businesses that are now very much over indebted, and that will really impact their growth. But I think what we have to focus on is providing finance that looks through last year's revenues and looks at next year's revenues in order to be able to provide that money. And I mean, I think the banks are into this for quite a bit. I think they'll have to take a reasonably sensible approach, but definitely the time is probably there for equity. Maybe alongside that. And again, not appropriate for every company, but it will be for a lot of them. I mean, we talked about the sort of our regional funds in the Midlands and the North have had record lending quarters over the past 2 quarters, as we've seen people sort of look towards the end of lockdown and rebuilding. So hopefully that's actually a positive sign rather than something that we should panic about.
Yeah, I'd say it's probably a good time to bring Jenny back in. I know Jenny's done a lot of work on regional investments.
Mark, just before that, could I make 2 points? One is I agreed absolutely with what John had to say. Big issues there. But on the positive side, I think the Bank of England has recognised that Europe isn't going to play ball over equivalence, and therefore I read that their policy is to go as far as they can on reducing regulation and making us much more competitive in that area.
That's a good point, Hardy. I guess we'll have to wait and see what comes through on that one. Be interested to see how that plays out. Did you have another question, Howard, as well? Another point?
No, that's all right.
No, that's fine. That's fine. I'll go back to Jenny then, as I was. So Jenny, just asking about the regional investment and how you found how that's working. Do companies in the regions, are they bothered about debt or equity? Just kind of what's the mix there?
Thanks. No, I mean, first of all, just on the debt side, I think it is going to have challenges going forward for investors. So, we know as investors, when companies have got a lot of debt, that's a kind of major challenge for us when putting any more equity into those businesses. So, the balance between that is going to, be quite impactful for going forward for those companies that are also seeking next stage of equity too. So I think that's something to bear in mind. And obviously we, as you know, in parallel, when we looked at the future, a lot of us got together, including within Innovate Finance and Scale Up Institute, etc. We identified 15 billion gap in equity going forward. So you've got the big pile of indebtedness on the one side, but a massive, massive gap in the equity, piece going forward. And one of the biggest, and this isn't an even spread. So as I said, there is a huge equity gap if you look at the regions. If you look at the moment, 60% of equity is still focused down in the Golden Triangle. And that, that's both angel and VC going forward, despite the impact, Ken, of the, of the very important funds that BBB are putting forward. And if you look at the angel community, especially, it's a very patchy scene out there, and the capacity is actually extremely low. And we did a big mapping exercise this past year with the Scale Up Institute, and the amount of capacity available across the north for angel investment is about as much as annually. Is about similar to what you'd find in one big angel group like Cambridge Angels for a year. So if you look at that, there's massive gaps up there. And in terms of sectors, clearly that's the same thing, where you will still have a very disproportionate lack of real capacity around tech and tech investing as well, which is particularly deep tech. So big challenges there. The impact of the regional angel program, which is put on board for anyone who don't know it, the British Business Bank, or actually British Business Investments, put on the table a 100 million fund a couple of years ago, which is to give it out in sidecar funds to experienced angel groups. But unfortunately, if you look across, again, the regions, that experience and capacity to take on board those funds is actually extremely low. So the money's been mainly going to very experienced groups in the south who are looking to expand their investment opportunities into the regions. And so there is a very strong need for that to be reviewed and to move the boundaries around who can access that fund, and to increase it, because it's got very small critical mass. It's a drop in the ocean compared with what's needed in the region. So very big need to build a lot more capacity and a lot more potential. And for me, obviously, and I've talked about this before, we do know the lack of awareness and take-up of even the EIS, the EIS opportunities, EIS fund, EIS tax reliefs is relatively still really low in regions outside the Golden Triangle. If I move away from Scotland, where there's a kind of different community, bit of a sandwich there, where Scotland has been doing pretty well with the Scottish Co-Investment Fund. So I think we have got a lot to do. It's incredibly imbalanced. We'll say more about diversity later, but I think that if we're going to shift boundaries and really review how we're going to make a difference going forward, we have to rebuild capacity. The levelling up for me is about levelling up, capacity, investment capacity, as much as it is about infrastructure and everything else. And whether hopefully we can build out a bit more upon the opportunities through the British Business Bank, Innovate UK, and every other means we can to leverage going forward.
Yeah, it's probably a good time to bring Rolf back in from Innovate there, in terms of what are fintechs and tech companies telling you about the funding environment at the moment?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a few things to say there. Jenny referenced the growth capital report, which we worked on with Scale Up Institute in July, and there was within that 15 billion, there was an estimated 2 billion gap just for fintech, which is not insignificant. I mean, I think generally the funding environment's been relatively positive for fintech. Last year it was just over 4 billion, which was a record year. There was a slight dampening in the wake of Brexit, but not enormous. And I suppose all of that still needs to be played out, and we'll never know the counterfactual of what might have happened if the referendum went the other way. But on that front, at least, it's relatively positive. Certainly on the early stage, VCs are still very, very active and very, very interested in the sector, and in a huge range of verticals within fintech. So yeah, that is positive. I mean, there remains a few wrinkles, a few issues which have been raised. So in both in that growth capital report and in the Khalifa review of the sector, which came out earlier this year, a couple of things were highlighted. Maybe just to draw out a couple. So one particularly relevant is we'd like to see one of the things that was recommended in that review was this, I guess, a leveling of the playing field for EIS, SEIS, and VCT for fintechs, because regulated businesses can't take advantage of it. And I think well over half of fintech founders who were surveyed said, that's a concern for them, because they might be unregulated at the moment, and for those founders, it's a very popular route. I think well over 90% of founders have taken advantage of one of those schemes. But if they decide to pivot to something like, a banking business model or lending or insurance, it's not going to be open for them. So that's one thing we would like to see change, and that is a bit of a wrinkle. There are some other points about R&D tax incentives as well, and that was one of the things which the Chancellor announced recently. I think the other thing is looking at sort of how we can create, how we can unlock a bit more institutional capital. Another recommendation was basically creating a fintech growth fund of about $1 billion, which would be FS industry led, kind of private sector run, but with that government sort of sponsorship, if you like, and maybe some concessions on things like the DC cap, which it's been debated a great deal already. We'd certainly love to see that and just give a bit more of that kind of rocket fuel that the sector needs, that those scaling businesses need to, as I said earlier, become tomorrow's unicorns or IPO candidates. And that's when it starts to get really exciting. And certainly for fintech, we're thinking more and more about that IPO stage. And there have been some recent ones, Pension B a few weeks ago, which went very well. So I think generally positive, but there's always more that can be done to support the sector for sure.
Sure, and that's what it's all about, trying to create more pension Bs and trying to create more of those unicorns in the UK, absolutely. John, we had quite a few proposals there. Rolf mentioned a couple, Ben mentioned a couple earlier about pension funds, investing more in early stage businesses. We've had kind of this idea of a BGF 3I style fund or a recapitalization fund. What would you like to see? What proposals do you like? What don't you like?
I'd obviously like the EIS and SSS rules, the allowances, the simplicity to all be addressed to make it, easier to manage those funds. I mainly invest at the very early stage.
Yeah.
And I know that most of the focus government is actually at the scaling stage, and I understand their problems, but I've just had my 4th Series B in the last 2 months, and every one of them was an overseas fund, and the valuation uplift was enormous. So I'm always skeptical when when I'm listening to big British-based VCs, it's because they can't get in the rounds. The money is coming from America, Europe, Far East, everyone. Once you get to that stage, I've just had a 12 times cap lift from A to B, led by an American fund. That's what's happening, in the, so we say the bull market of maybe the bubble market of finance. We've had a SPAC. And Jenny will know about this because she's connected to one of those, etc. So, at the scale stage, massive amount of information, massive amount of money going in, kind of, etc. I'm more concerned with how do people get started, and I know the scales give all the kind of things, and the British want to make sure that it's British money, because that's what I'm talking about. Yes, it will have to relocate to the States. Yes, it will basically be more tied to the American economy than ours. And I know that may be a strategic issue for the British government, but I would like to look at the really early stage. I would like more ECFs. As far as I can see, there's only one that was announced in the last 12 months. I mean, I'd like to see 3 or 4 every year, new ones, because, all the commitment periods run out and then they try and find. And so actually the money at the early stage, we need it more and more. So that's what I would focus, is look at that very early stage, because that's what we were good at. That's what we were great at. That's what we killed Europe on and became the 3rd best in the world, that really early stage. And I know they're all focused on the scale and good and all of that. But at the moment, as an investor, the scale seems to be sorting itself out. I'm more worried about the really early stage.
Yeah, I think that's something we've echoed, that we felt Future Fund was helping perhaps earlier stage companies and kind of missed out for certain reason and ways of doing it. It didn't help those early stage companies, that first money in, that kind of first fundraising for a company, that first VC money in for the company. So that's very much something that we're pushing for. Ken, I'm loath to bring you in at that point, because I feel like I'm having a go at you, but I'm not. But is there anything British Business Bank are thinking in that area that might help for early stage companies, really early stage companies?
We're always thinking, Mark. And actually, John, it was a very busy year for us last year, but we still managed to commit to 3 ECFs during the year.
There's 2 still in stealth, as again. I was kind of looking at the site and saying,
sometimes we have actually become, and I'd love to get a plug in for the ECF program, because I mean it is performing really well. It's a great way for skilled investors to become first-time fund managers, and we are always looking for people to talk to. One of the things we've done recently, John, and particularly over the last year, because fundraising had that kind of bump in the middle, is we allowed more second closings. So the reason you may not have seen an announcement is because we wait for the second close to make that announcement. But yeah, we're looking for another 3 or 4 this year. We still have budget for ECFs, and we still want to do them. I mean, the Future Fund was great for almost democratizing investment, because it was very easy to get to. Of course, it was quite expensive. 1,190 individual convertible loan notes issued under that program for £1.14 billion. We've already seen 80 conversions on that. We have indeed seen a SPAC and another float. So it's been a really interesting program. In terms of the early stage, I couldn't call what the spending review is going to have in terms of money, but certainly we're looking at kind of 2 ends of the dumbbell, if you like. We're looking at the very early stage, what we can do to help out more there, and we're also looking at the issue, because I think it is an issue, John. If all of our good companies can only see an exit to the US, we're perhaps not quite so worried about that. But where next after the US? You know, a lot of the money that's coming in is Chinese money, and yeah, I think there should be a way to keep some of that good tech in the UK, and that's actually largely what the Future Fund Breakthrough is aiming to do. But absolutely agreed. I think ECFs, we're going to keep doing those definitely, because we have the budget, and we're also looking at what more we can do in the early stage.
Brilliant. All right, thanks very much, Ken. We could talk for another half an hour, I'm sure, but time's ticked on, but way too quickly. We need to go back to Sue as well. So Rolf, Jenny, John, Ken, thank you very much for joining us for the panel. That's a really useful panel. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Sue, I'm hoping I'm going to come back to you and your video is going to work and your audio is going to work. There we go. Hi, Sue.
Hi, can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, so everyone, you can hear me, and I'm Sue Crawford. I'm going to share my screen if I can. Sorry. Can you see my screen now, everybody?
Yes.
Good. Okay. Now I won't take long, and it's quite good because of this audio hitch.
Sorry, Sue, I can't see your screen. I don't think we can see your screen.
Okay.
I can see it.
Can you see slides, Howard? Because Sue's
yeah,
trying to
there's John, Mark, and Sue are all slides on my screen, with Gillian at the bottom.
No, Sue's trying to show some slides. There we go, Sue. Perfect. Thank you.
Can you see those?
Yeah, go for it.
Can you see it now?
Yeah, I can see it. Yeah, go for it. Yeah, go for it.
Sorry. Well, look, guys, we'll just have to kind of go through it like this. Something's happened now with the slides, Mark.
No, I can see them. We can all see them.
You can see that slide?
Yeah, I can see. So there's EIS technical update. Yeah.
Yeah, I know, but then that is not my. Well, look, I'll just jump to this. I don't know what's happening. The slides have gone a bit funny. I wanted just to highlight a few things that we talk about quite a lot in the tax and technical sessions. One of them is in relation to takeovers, where, as you all know, if you've got a takeover of an EIS target by another company, that's typically a disposal.
Yeah.
And so, as a general rule, that's even where you've got capital gains tax relief. As a general rule, there is no continuity between the old holding and the new holding. And if that happens within 3 years, obviously EIS relief is withdrawn, and the disposal of the new shares that are issued by the taking over company, they won't qualify for EIS relief. Moreover, if this takeover happens after 3 years, disposal relief will apply then, and there'll be no capital gains on that disposal at the time of that takeover. But the new shares will not be EIS shares, and they won't qualify for disposal relief. So I wanted just to talk about a couple of exceptions to that rule and point out a couple of kind of problems. sorry, this is the slide I want to go to next. Sorry, the slides I'm showing you are not the slides that actually I had prepared. This is what's throwing me. But let's just look at this. This is where we have one of the exceptions is where a new co is being put on top of an existing EIS company. And there is a tension here between EIS relief and stamp duty relief. For EIS relief, there has to be the issue of the shares in the new co that's taking over the existing EIS company has to be on an exact mirror image basis. If those shares are issued to all the shareholders, all the EIS shareholders, all the existing shareholders in exact proportion, exact class, exact number, then basically there'll be continuity between the old holding and the new holding. This is provided that the existing EIS company has issued EIS shares and certificates. In this case, and this is actually under Section 247, the EIS relief will be maintained and there'll be continuity. Quite often in this situation, though, you will want also to apply for Section 77 stamp duty relief. Now, that relief requires an exact mirror image looking at the position after the consideration shares have been issued. And so problems can arise because if you have subscriber shares in NewCo and you actually issued shares to all the existing shareholders exactly mirroring, there is a problem where you have the two subscriber shares, because what will happen is NewCo would actually have to issue one or two, however many subscriber shares there are. It would have to issue less subscriber shares. So there's a tension between getting EIS relief under Section 247 and getting stamp duty relief. Now, it is unfortunate that Alex Buckley has gone, because this is something that we are going to raise with the revenue and ask either for the stamp duty relief to be applied more leniently where there's EIS relief being sought, or at least changing the rules. But one ought to be aware of that. I mean, to highlight this problem, if I can go to this slide, Avril Finn was a case some 6 or 7 years ago with exactly this issue on the table. I don't know why they didn't think about things, but basically it was an AIM-listed company was taking over an EIS company. Both of them actually were EIS companies. And this was in the 3-year period. And so without more, they would have lost the relief. But what they argued that the Section 247 mirror image relief applied. But as I've just said, there's an issue where you have subscriber shares. Now, they argued here that basically the subscriber shares should be all the people who had subscribed on day one. They were, originally on the setup of NFIS. But the court held that the subscriber shares were shares issued to subscribers of the Memorandum of Association. I mean, the point I actually hadn't highlighted, for 247 relief, it only applies if the only shares in issue in the taking over company are subscriber shares. So here they were trying to shoehorn themselves into Section 247 relief by arguing that all the existing shareholders in NFIS were subscribers. The court said, well, they were very, very sympathetic with the argument that all those shareholders who had come in on day one were subscribers, but the court couldn't grant the relief because those many people had not all signed up to the Memorandum of Association. So these problems, and there are many relating to 247, Section 77 stamp duty relief, and these takeovers, they are something that the Tax and Technical Committee are wanting to take forward with the revenue.
Yeah.
What I also want to mention is if we have the takeover of an EIS company after 3 years. So if an exchange, this is another exception, because if you recall at the beginning, I said if there was a takeover in an EIS company even after 3 years, then there is prima facie no continuity. However, there is a relief here if the takeover of an EIS company happens after 3 years and it's by another EIS company, the acquiring company, that's company B in my example, if that company has itself issued EIS shares and EIS certificates, then there is continuity. So you've got one EIS company taking over another. You know, you have to look at the conditions, but as a general rule, there will be no deemed disposal, and the new shares will qualify for EIS relief. And so that's all very well and good, and the section is there. But what is rather unfortunate is that this provision, and I'm squinting to find my slides, which have all gone haywire, but never mind. This provision also applies typically if an SEIS company takes over another SEIS company. So we have relief where one EIS company takes over another EIS company, and relief where an SEIS company takes over an SEIS company. But we don't have mix and match. And again, the Tax and Technical Committee find this anomaly rather surprising. It's making life difficult because increasingly there's consolidation in the market and takeovers are on the table. But words of warning there that, you know, to ensure that you are having like for like and following the rules very carefully. The other point I wanted to talk about briefly is in relation to advance subscription agreements. And here, this is an update for you guys, because I suspect most of you know what we mean by an advance subscription agreement. And you will recall that there was quite a bit of fuss at the end of December, because the revenue suggested that if you had an advance subscription agreement, the date when the shares would be issued there should be a 6-month long stop date. And the revenue in their guidance in December 2019, which applied both to advanced subscription agreements for EIS and SEIS, the guidance said that if there was not that 6-month long stop date, then they would be denying advance assurance. Now, inspectors were actually treating this guidance really as a hard and fast rule and turning down advance assurance. Now, the EIS Tax and Technical Committee, we lobbied HMRC, and actually discussions were had with Alex Buckley, and he indicated that this long stop date could extend beyond 6 months if it was for a genuine commercial purpose. It might have passed you by in all the lockdown, but the guidance was updated in March 2021. And now it's a little bit clearer. I mean, it hasn't gone nearly as far as we would have hoped, but that the 6 months isn't an absolute deadline. And if you can persuade the revenue, you may be able to still, you know, get advance assurance, even if there's a longer than 6 months long stop date. But I would suggest that you read that carefully and the nuances there if you are going for an advanced subscription agreement. I'd point out also that the revenue haven't changed the guidance for SEIS. I mean, they really don't like advanced assurance agreements for SEIS because they haven't made any changes to their guidance. But that's just worth pointing out. And then finally, but we've really discussed this, is you know, what we were saying. We wanted to comment on the revenue's time to respond to advance assurance. Alex has spoken about this. We are finding lots of questions are being asked by the revenue, lots of requests for information, which actually have already been included. But I think Alex has dealt with this quite nicely, and we now have, grateful to him, we have a way of kind of pointing out anomalies. 2.5 people, that isn't many inspectors, so that's interesting news that you know, we know that they can consult with each other. But Mark, I know we're over time, and I'm sorry for all the technical hitches. And also, I will recirculate. These are not the final slides. They're not even in the right order. This has been pretty scary for me, but I will circulate the slides because you will actually find quite a lot of information there.
Brilliant, thanks very much, Sue. Yeah, the quicker we can all get back to live physical events, we don't have to worry about calling in. It's nice to see a traditional phone, by the way. When we get back to back to doing it, will be way much easier. So thank you very much for your input there. But yeah, no, you're right, we are slightly over time, so I'll just finish things up very quickly. Yeah, there's a few bits and pieces we can send out. I'll send out Sue's slides. I'm sure Julian will be happy to send out her slides as well. We'll send out that policy inbox for HMRC and a link to BIM's report that he put forward together. So yeah, just a few things to update you on. Awards deadline, 28th of May is the last date for the awards. So you haven't got long to get your submission in now. I know quite a few people have registered. Actually, there's not too many submissions yet. So please do get that in the next couple of weeks or so. House of Lords, we're still hoping, please, God, please hope we'll be able to do the 1st of July actually at the House of Lords. So that is still in the diary at the moment as we stand. Obviously, we'll see how that goes. We might have to move things online as we did last year, but so far, we hope that'll be a physical event. We have a Fund Manager Forum on the 8th of June. If you want to be involved in that as a fund manager, then let me know. And then finally, hot off the press, there is an OTS CGT report coming out today. It's embargoed till 4 o'clock, so I can't tell you what's in it, or else I would probably be killed. But there is mention of EIS in there and some bits and pieces around it. In fact, there's a whole recommendation around it. Again, I can't tell you what it is. I should get that out to you tomorrow, but look out for that tomorrow. I think that'll be an interesting one. I think we're done. Thank you very much for joining us as always. We'll be doing the autumn technical seminar sometime in November. We'll let you know dates and times for that. Otherwise, it just leaves me to thank all of our panelists, all of our presenters this morning, and we'll do it all again very soon. Take care, everyone.
Yes.